Welcome to, well, this is the day at Indy, Anders Krohn, but this is actually the morning at Indy, the morning after a wild bump day. So I figured we're still going to do our end of day at Indy, but we kind of got to talk. There's still more to talk about, so I figure the day at Indy here in the Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires. Cooper Tires you and I love as two folks who do lots of conversating about the Mazda Road to Indy, and also supported by our friends at Bell Racing Helmets USA. Our friend the Mayor, and also Pippa Mann, not in the show, at least for the conversations you've heard, Anders, and a lot of the conversations I have had in the last, 12 hours, 6, I don't know, however many hours, most of them not on the record, right? Background stuff, but you and I have been speaking with a lot of folks. Haven't heard much on the Pippa front in terms of will they buy or have an opportunity to buy something for her to get into the show. But we have heard a lot about Hinch. Just give me your thoughts as someone who, like myself, spends their days reporting, analyzing. How strange is this for you, seeing what's taken place and the fact that it's not someone that we even considered wouldn't be playing today, Sunday, for pole?
No, exactly, and I don't think there's a clear-cut answer as to what's going to happen for James. I mean, there certainly isn't an apparent sort of huge opening for a ride just to slot right into it. It's not like anyone's qualified for this race hoping to give up the ride like we've maybe seen in years past where someone, could bump themselves in and get bought out of the ride. And I think that's the strange situation, and just how bizarre yesterday was. I was shell-shocked. I mean, even after 550 had hit, I was still shocked and just in disbelief that Hinch is out and no apparent immediate way in.
And I think we can say this without it being disrespectful to any of the other drivers. And if it's taken that way, well, I guess take it because that's what I mean. No, but if you look at the fact that Hinch, beyond the Dancing with the Stars stuff, the fact that if you turn on a television, you're probably going to see a Honda ad with James Hinchcliffe as their spokesperson, it's kind of safe to say, Anders, James has become the national face of IndyCar in a short amount of time. Not that Elio, Joseph Newgarden, again, we can name all the drivers, champions who've done a lot, to try and engage with the public. But when you've got someone who's really our only guy on national TV that folks are starting to connect with, and he's the guy not in the show, holy crap, I think that's a big part of folks' reaction as well. Not just that we love Hinch, but this has become a really important person in IndyCar's growth.
It has, but I think kind of, it's what we've been asking for, and exactly as what James said yesterday. Yeah, I was all in favor for the bumping until, it affected us, and now I'm not such a big fan of it, right?
Great idea, bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think kind of it's for the global good that there is bumping again, and I think it keeps driving interest. And I mean, just look at the media spike after the shock that went through not just the paddock, but the entire world, really. The fact that one of the most renowned drivers on the grid is in fact out.
I wish we could use curse words in headlines and stories, because that's all it would be. Holy bleep, bleep, bleep.
Exactly, and so I think it's driven so much media attention to the fact that one of its biggest stars, if not the biggest star currently, is not going to be on the grid for the 500 unless something drastically changes. So for me, it's obviously a huge shame to see him out at the moment, but at the same time, what we saw yesterday was just motor racing at its very best. I was on pins and needles.
Purist as well.
Exactly.
There's no participation trophies here. Even the big names can go home.
And I sent out a tweet this morning just basically saying, looking at Hinch, how he handled himself through that pain and adversity that he's been through, and really everyone that's surrounded by him should be proud. And there were a bunch of responses saying, well, we should probably just put him and Pippa back in the show. They shouldn't have an opportunity to qualify again today, but they should start 34th and 35th. And there were a lot of tweets about compromise, but I'm thinking to myself, well, Indianapolis Motor Speedway and IndyCar isn't about compromise. It's about you're either in or you're out. And so, and I don't think Hinch would want it any other way either. If the shoe was, and that's exactly why I loved Hinch's response, because he realized they've been defeated. at that point in time, he realized that they'd been defeated, and he didn't try and find some excuse as to why he should be back in the show at that point in time. So, to me, it's why the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is cruel, but it's also why it's so beautiful, because the emotions that went through certainly my body yesterday, and certainly thousands of other people, that's what we live for.
Should mention quickly that during this month of May, we are very thankful to have our friends at Bell Racing Helmets USA supporting us. They have been in business, Mr. Krohn, 1954, a couple years after you were born. They've been the choice of champions when it comes to state-of-the-art head protection for far longer than the two of us have been alive. As I mentioned more than once this month, 19 of the 35 drivers entered for the Indy 500 Bell athletes. They are indeed designed for professionals and amateur drivers. They are synonymous with safety, innovation, performance, and engineering excellence. They also smell good. If you make a request, you can get your helmets coming. They either smell like cookies, vanilla. It's a good thing. Root beer is a new option, but I have to see if they still have that smell available. You can learn more about Bell helmets at bellracing.com. So the main reason I asked my pal Anders Krohn to come in this morning for us to have this little morning podcast session wasn't just to commiserate over Hinch not being in the show, but it was to talk through some of the rules about what options exist. That's the real heart of what we're going to do here. What rules are in play that might be exercised by Schmidt Peterson Motorsports to find him a ride? And also, from a realistic standpoint, what's out there to get. And that's what I have spent, again, many hours talking with folks. Some of the drivers, there are quite a few that have been mentioned, like, oh, well, this guy clearly is going to step out of the car. So we're going to get to the driver's side in just a moment. Let's start off with the rules. So spoke with Jay Fry, president of competition at IndyCar this morning, and there are some clear rules in place, Anders, about what Hinch would or would not be able to do. Now, IndyCar obviously holds the first and last right of approval on everything. So there's a rule book. There's also, I'm not saying that they would just make up rules to suit Hinch or anyone else, but ultimately they can decide if they got a request, whether they would grant it or not. There's one that's interesting here, and this happens to fall under the Indy 500 qualifying rule. It's Rule 8.4.3.8, and it says, except as otherwise provided, and I think that's the wiggle room, the same car and driver must be used in both Saturday and Sunday qualifying. So what that says is, if Schmidt Peterson Motorsports is able to find a ride to buy and move Hinch into, he wouldn't be able to get into that car until Monday, correct? Practice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's obviously kind of similar to the situation with Ryan Hunter-Reay and Bruno Junqueira back in, obviously bump day at that time was on Sunday rather than Saturday, so there was no opportunity to predict the future there. But certainly whoever the driver is that they're talking to, or whoever the team is that they're talking to, would have to complete qualifying today, and then they could look at moving it. And I know you had some conversations with Jay as well about what the definition of a car is, so maybe you can elaborate on that as well.
Honestly, that was the critical thing, Anders, to try and figure out. So as it says here, the same car and driver, but what is a car as IndyCar defines it? And interesting, IndyCar, the way they treat their rule book, this is becoming, I would say, almost the standard in motor racing, at least, where they tell you the rule, right? Whatever the thing is, they say you can do this, you can't do that. But if they didn't write something, that doesn't mean it's an open area for you to exploit. In other words, when it comes to defining a car, there's nothing super, super crazy definitive. So my question to Jay was, looking through the possible Honda doors that SPM might try and walk through, that looks a little bit of a challenge, but there might be a Chevy or two team. Could that be an avenue? The biggest thing overall, and there's a little bit of an assumption here. I don't know if I haven't seen Hinch's contract. I don't know if you have either, but I think we could make a logical assumption that if James is now a national spokesperson for Honda, there's probably a personal services contract in place, and there's probably a clause that says if James Hinchcliffe is driving a motor racing vehicle at the Indianapolis 500, it will have a Honda in it.
Exactly.
So that's what drove the whole outreach to Jay to get further clarification on what is a car. If SPM can't find a Honda entry to buy access to, could they go to a Chevy team and do a motor swap? And that's the part where Jay said, although it isn't written into the rule book defining that, there is nothing allowing that because we haven't written anything saying that you can. So although, again, there's no exact rule, 8 point whatever, clarifying it, the fact that it's not in there saying you can means you cannot.
And the way I've understood it is that it's indeed the entry that qualifies for the Indy 500. So in the case of Bruno Junqueira, he was the driver that qualified, but he qualified the A.J. Foyt entry back in the day. And Brian Hunter-Reay, when he stepped into that seat, it didn't automatically become an Andretti Autosport entry. It remained an A.J. Foyt entry. So I think that's the way they're going to treat this. And by virtue of that basically eliminates all the Chevy options as well for Hinch and SPM to explore. So then that leaves what Honda team/driver combo would be willing to step aside. And to me, the answer is none.
Yeah, and so some of this stuff we're talking about might be obvious. You might already know it and have known it and sussed it out, but it seems like in high-pressure situations like this that are far from scripted, we didn't come in Saturday morning going, oh, yeah, Hinch, he's done. Done so.
No,
pack
exactly.
up now, buddy. You have to ask the questions to get clarity because, who knows how things might be handled. So, as you just mentioned, Chevy doors closed, we believe, unless there is some strange allowance that Honda might give Hinch. But again, that doesn't seem practical to me. So, with all that said, let's kind of narrow in on what we think would be potentials for Hinch to look at. I shouldn't say Hinch, for the Schmidt team to look at, because ultimately he is their employee, right? Yeah. Hinch isn't the guy walking around the gasoline alley knocking on doors saying, hey, what's it going to take? It would be his team. The first person, and I think the most frequent name that we have heard mentioned, Jay Howard, right? Oh, well, Sam's going to pull Jay Howard out of that car, right? That would be a wrong.
That would be no way in HELL.
Yes.
I think it's Jay is pretty well protected in his current agreement. I think he was obviously instrumental in bringing significant amount of funding to that and unless there's anything written into his contract that if his full-time teammate were to not qualify, he gets bumped, which I seriously doubt, I don't see any way of him being removed from his seat.
And I have heard from some very good sources that Jay has said, even if I were asked, there's no way. And so here's maybe a little interesting thing to get into, and this is not just you being an analyst, Anders, but also as being a supremely talented motor racing driver, having gone very far on the road to Indy.
Well, you're a liar there, but I'll take it.
Look, it's Sunday morning. I haven't been to church yet. I'm trying to do some good deeds here, okay? You work really hard. You're in Jay Howard's situation. Last year, you worked very hard to put a sponsor together to have a competitive ride at the Indy 500. As we know, he had they ran out of fuel going into turn one, had that collision with Dixon. It wasn't him steering into Dixon. I mean, this was not Jay making a driving mistake that caused Dixon's big crash. He got a lot of flack for it that I don't think was deserved. But knowing how unsatisfactory, I don't think that's a word, his 2017 race was, he went right to work to get back in the saddle for 2018. So this is a guy coming off a painful 2017 race. And guess who was the fastest of the Schmidt cars, right? Another thing we're like coming in yesterday, we were like, and this is disrespectful. And I actually feel bad for, not being more open-minded. Hey, that number 7 car driven by Jay Howard, that was the team leader in terms of performance yesterday. So massive respect due to Jay and his entire crew. You line all this stuff up and you say, here's a man who has found and brought a sponsor. I don't know the numbers, but everything I've heard says it's a nice number, right? This is very helpful to the team. A guy coming off a really unrewarding Indy 500, fastest of the Schmidt cars yesterday, has been quick all week long for all, I think one day he had a little bit of a struggle, but there's nothing that lines up that says, oh, yeah, pull that joker out. He doesn't belong, or he would even be open to it. I think I can state with complete clarity, Sam knows to not even ask, and Jay has every intention of being in that car for the Indy 500, even despite what his teammate is going through.
And I would say I completely agree with everything you're saying, and he actually has been really impressive during this entire week, both in traffic and in single lap runs. So he's done a bang-up job. He really has. I think if I put myself in his shoes, or any of the other drivers' shoes for that matter, the only way I'm stepping out of my seat is if I've got a proposition in front of me that guarantees me some sort of part-time ride, and a part-time ride for the remainder of this year, or a guarantee of a part-time ride next year with the Indy 500 baked in, something that basically takes that doubles the value of what I'm getting this year going into next year or tail end of this season. But other than that, as a driver, you can never predict the future. You never can, and so whatever someone is offered, it's got to be so enticing that they can't turn it down. And I don't know that anyone can really offer something that enticing.
And on the financial side, I think that's the only other thing, and that's when we're going to get into that with a couple of other driver and team situations too, as we kind of head towards the conclusion here, Anders. It's either it would have to be an enticement that is financial, and probably a pretty significant one, like, ooh, that number that you're putting in front of me could actually change my life. Or B, for some of the drivers who are one-offs, Indy only, or something like that, it would have to be some sort of, as you mentioned, 3-4 races, something where you're like, all right, well, month of May is huge, but maybe it'd feel good to play more race car than just one race. I would say, at least for me, remove Jay Howard from your conversation, friends, because that man will be racing in the Indy 500 in the number 7 Schmidt Peterson Honda. I mean, if we move down the list, we look at a Kyle Kaiser, you go, well, hey,
he's got a Chevy.
but small team, they could definitely use a big money, if you wrote a big check for him, great, he's in a Chevy. Right. That is not an option. You look at Steph Wilson, again, another Indy-only person, right? Anders, what happened last year, the Indy 500, with Steph Wilson? I keep looking for him in the results, and I can't find him.
Well, all I know is I was on race day in a booth in Midway selling gap guards with Stephen Wilson, and he was meant to be on the grid. So I think
there is no way.
I don't want to speak on his behalf, but there is no way he would ever give up this ride.
Step aside for someone else 2 years in a row. Young Stephen Wilson, a charitable and kind man. He ain't that charitable.
and to be honest with you, he's feeling good about his chances. I mean, I think
he's in the fight.
Qualifying, he did a good job.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I mean, in race trim, he's actually looked really, really good. So I think he realizes this could be my only shot at really proving myself at the Indy 500. He's not going to give that up.
And considering how his debut in 2016 was a poop fest, let's just say that despite his sponsors being very supportive and making that ride happen, let's just say that the commensurate quality of a car and effort put beneath him was maybe not there. So, to your exact point, here's Steph in a great seat with the defending race winners looking solid. Yeah, we're scratching him off the list.
Forget about it.
Yeah, we're getting the fat Sharpie for that one. And again, I'm just mentioning some of these names because I've seen some, there's been some names have been mentioned more than others. Gabby Chavez, again, Chevy, plus he drives for Mike Harding.
No way.
He is actually born with bricks from Indianapolis as part of his DNA. That is not happening. Interesting one here. The number 19 Dale Coyne Racing PaySafe sponsored Honda driven by Zachary Clayman DeMello. Let's sit here in this one for a minute or two, Anders. So that could be one, right? I mean, that seat was just open, a matter of days ago, seemingly. Could that door be cracked open and then you go, doesn't he have a teammate that didn't qualify? I mean, that would be an extraordinary situation for Dale to take entertain the idea of bringing in Hinch to be in the 19 instead of Pippa Mann, who failed to qualify in the Dale Coyne Racing number 63, right?
Yeah. No, and that's a difficult one. I think Zachary Clayman de Mello, again, I think he actually did a pretty solid job in qualifying.
First out.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
so honestly, I know I'm jumping ahead here, but I think the only driver I would look at in this list and say this makes sense on some level would be Connor Daly. And it's if he were offered some sort of part-time ride, including an Indy 500 effort next year or something, because obviously Connor Daly has put in so much effort to put this Indy 500 run together. He probably realizes that they're not going to have the pace to contend for a top 10 finish unless something freakish happens, right? It's the only driver I'm looking at and saying maybe on some level this were to make sense. But then again, as a driver, you never want to remove yourself because you never know. You could have a complete freak race and Connor could find himself at the front. And certainly if he were to jump out, James jumps in, and for whatever reason things fall their way and they end up winning or doing a top 5, that's severely detrimental to someone like a Connor Daly's career. So the only person that I can look at on the list that would make any level of sense would be Connor Daly.
And it makes me wonder if there was any former landlord clause, it's in order to sleep on my couch. If ever there's a point where I don't make the race, I get to drive your car. That's the only thing I can think of. That's where I wanted us to end on was Connor. So we're going to come back to that in just 1 second and then say farewell to this episode. The one other car to consider would be Oriol Servia's one-off with Scuderia Corsa, making their Indy 500 debut as an entrant. That team is obviously being run by Rahal Letterman Lanigan. I know for a fact that Giacomo Mattioli, who owns Scuderia Corsa, also owns numerous Ferrari and other dealerships in the Los Angeles area. You don't own those things in that area unless you have a nice old wedge of change in your pocket, Anders. I know for a fact that Oriol and Giacomo tried to do their 500 deal first with Schmidt Peterson Motorsports. Without getting into too much of some of the other things that I've heard, he's not driving for Schmidt Peterson Motorsports this month, which tells me that there was some sort of breakdown somewhere. I'd heard that they might have gotten pretty close and something got derailed at the last minute. So I don't know if there's a real warm door for SPM to possibly go through there. And I've also heard pretty much straightforward, there's no amount of money that Giacomo or his business partner Art, there's no amount of money you can throw at them. I think they're going to be pretty much lock solid and happy with Oriol in the car.
Well, and the other thing about Oriol, I know yesterday was a freak qualifying session for him, but he's been strong all month. I mean, he's, in my opinion, he's been the strongest Rahal Letterman Lanigan racing. In traffic, he's looked incredible. I mean, for me, he was arguably going into qualifying, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, he was my second favorite Honda behind Bourdais.
Yeah.
And again, what happened in qualifying, no idea. I know that they're digging through that car.
Yeah.
But if I'm Oriol Servia, I know I don't, I haven't qualified the way that I wanted to, but I'm feeling pretty good about my chances in the race.
Let me throw out one more name that I missed. That's my fault. Another name that I've heard mentioned quite a few times on social media, at least. Hey, what about Jack Harvey, right? He's part of the Schmidt Peterson Motorsports family. Yeah. Technical Alliance.
Michael Shank Racing, or Meyer Shank Racing first.
Racing. That car is owned and run by MSR.
Yep.
That is not owned by Schmidt. The team's new co-owner is the CEO of SiriusXM, which is the primary sponsor on the car. That is not Sam's car, and I don't mean Sam like he's pulling strings and being evil, but it's not Sam's car to make any decisions with. That is solely a decision of Jim Meyer and Michael Shank. I know for a fact, not saying I spoke with them, but if I were to have heard this, the phrase mentioned yet again, there's no amount of money, / I don't need the money. We're good.
Yeah.
So Jack Harvey will be competing in the Indy 500 in that entry period, so take that off the list. But coming back to the conclusion here, just before we say farewell, I'm with you. Connor's the only one that I think maybe Mike could. I've heard that he's a racer.
Yep.
There's nothing in him that's like, oh, yes, I'd love to be drinking a beer in turn one during the race. He wants to be in the race. also things that I've heard, and this is just, coloring the scenario a little bit, he has been the one who has worked super hard to make this happen. This isn't Dale Cooney rang up and said, come drive the car, we found these sponsors. This has been him behind the scenes, pulling in the Air Force. I've also heard, he might be on the line a little bit financially too, so I'm just saying he's the only one that stands out to me that if this was some sort of life-changing financial incentive or a 3 to 4 races down the line, I've heard that might have already been offered to him. I think from everything we've looked at on this entry list, everyone that went through qualifying yesterday, Anders, I think Connor might be the only one with that inner question to ask. Do I go with my heart or do I go with my head, which is the business side?
Yeah.
And then you start to ask, well, is there a way you, at your first pit stop, could hop out and Hinch could jump in, and then the next one? So, again, we would love to see Hinch in this race, brother, but unless Connor is the one, and I'm not seeing anyone else, there's a big part of me that thinks we're going to see bigger Aero Electronics branding on the 3 SPM cars in the field, and our friend Mr. Hinchcliffe might either be in the massive Turn 1 Aero hospitality compound, plus maybe on air a little bit with ABC, but barring something with Connor, I don't know if there's really a deal to be done. Does that sound about right from how you're reading things?
I mean, and it's funny because until we'd sat down and we have the whole qualifications list in front of us, until I physically looked down at Connor's name, I didn't think there was a one candidate that stood out. But now in going through it and kind of going through the logic with you, it's the only one to me that on any level would make sense. Whether it happens or not, obviously no idea. And again, if I put myself in Connor's shoes, I have worked my tail off to get into this seat. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway gives you the ultimate highs and the ultimate lows. You just never know what's going to happen on race day, and unless you're in the seat, you won't know which day that's going to be. So if Connor had a crystal ball and knew that, race day for him was going to be incredible and his best run at Indy 500 yet, he would say no regardless. However, if he knew, this is going to be a tough day for me, then maybe that decision's a little easier. So.
Stepson of Doug Bowles, the person in charge of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, stepping out of his seat. Again, there's so many little angles where you go, ooh, that might be a hard one to get over.
You know what I keep coming back to, though? We wanted bumping.
Yes.
We're having this conversation because there was bumping.
We have something to talk about this morning.
This is pure excitement. We're not just waiting to determine who the pole sitter is going to be and then we don't care about the rest of the field. This is incredible. This is exactly what we've been wanting for. And specifically the entire experience of going through the qualifying yesterday, I had goosebumps the entire time because you never knew at any one time who was going to be in the show or not. And that's exactly what the Indy 500 is about. And that's what made me fall in love with IndyCar in the first place. So at the end of the day, take all those kind of elements in and the heartbreak that's involved. This is what we've been asking for.
And this is why, as much as we love everyone and want everyone to be able to participate, this is what makes this race amazing. And this is why I'm so thankful I had you come up here, brother, as a racer, as a commentator, just as a sexy guy. That too. I haven't mentioned
Face for radio, Marshall.
So really, we're going to close. We're going to leave you out on two things. Per the rules, if James Hinchcliffe were to get into a car Monday, tomorrow would be the day. Right? The rules would bar him from being in a car today. There is one other thing I failed to mention, which is if someone were to withdraw an entry, right? That could be a way to, but. Again, that might have to be a money deal. Hey,
I'm pretty certain it's got to be a qualified entry that enters the race. So I think.
I should have.
And if it's
closer,
qualified entry and someone had withdrawn, then it would be Pippa Mann.
So even
going
there,
into the race.
Good Lord.
So yeah, there is really no logistical way of getting James's current entry into the race.
So there's really one item left to keep exploring between now and tomorrow. Landlord clause, brother. Sleeping on that couch wasn't free. We got to find out what kind of, it might be on a napkin. I don't know. Anders Krohn, I love you. Thank you for coming here, spending some time.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
The brunch at Indy. I don't know what this is. We haven't even eaten anything, so I can't really call it that.
It's kind of nice, actually. I got to sleep in this morning. It was incredible.
I feel human. I actually got a little bit of sleep.
And you're on West Coast time zone as well, or at least have been until a couple of weeks ago.
I've got issues regardless. Hey, thank you, Anders, for joining us here in the whatever it is at Indy, the Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires and supported this month by our friends at Bell Racing Helmets USA.